thanks a lot for joining us, 14th Annual Non-Dilutive Funding Summit. It's wonderful to see all of you, and really thank you both, Chris and Matt, for joining us here. We thought of doing something a bit different than just giving a little talk prior to starting having all the great presentations. And being in the business for 20 years, at FreeMind we started in 1999, so it is 20 years now. It was very easy to notice, to see the great two engines driving this industry forward. On the one hand, the non-dilutive funding agencies, which Matt obviously represents, largest program, the NIH SBIR program with $1 billion, and Chris, representing the VC community that obviously supports companies and advances the industry. And one of the striking things we thought about is the fact that to a great extent, there isn't enough, in my mind at least, communication between the two very, very important engines there. And while they serve the very same industry, they don't necessarily view it in the same way, and they don't necessarily view success of it in the same way. And so we thought we'll just have a chat and try to ask some questions. I've prepared, and you may ask questions as well, and see if we can maybe get a better clarity and better understanding of how this complementary relationship can maybe advance further, or where it stands. So that's pretty much what we're going to try to do in the next few minutes, maybe half hour or so. And so, Matt, I thought of maybe starting with you, and just making sure I read the right question. I think that the main question, it's very easy to understand what a company, how a company would define success approaching SBIR, right? They want to submit an application and hopefully get the money. It's very simple. But I'm not sure to what extent I fully understand what the SBIR program views as success. How would you define, what is your aim, really, as the SBIR program?
Sure, so that's kind of a multi-layered question. There's a success in the SBIR program kind of writ large, and then there's NIH, what we consider success, both in SBIR and as part of the NIH mission. And so, and especially since we're obviously a life science agency, success has many different flavors, many different routes, and I would say that there is clearly no one path to success, and every single project and product has its own path. But from the NIH high-level point of view, our mission is obviously to improve public health and reduce the burden of illness, disease, and disability. And so, SBIR program aside, if we improve people's health and get better diagnostics and prevent disease and help treat and cure disease when they have it, that's a win for us, regardless of the programs at NIH. And of course, SBIR and STTR are arguably the most directly relevant programs that do that in a very defined and focused way in a finite period of time. Most of NIH, $39 billion this current fiscal year is involved in basic research and applied research, and the currency in those domains typically are publications, and we do increase the broad knowledge base of biology in mankind, and there's definitely an obvious importance to that we value very highly. And of course, when you're looking at those level of metrics, we can see it takes years and decades to see differences. So the rate of heart disease and cancer comes down slowly over time when you look at it decade by decade, in part due to the research we do. But SBIR, we are getting a medical device or a drug or a research tool into patients, and it is having an immediate effect on that person and in the community. And so that's really important for us. And so when we think about SBIR, in terms of successes, yes, getting to market and sales are kind of the most obvious successes, sales and licensing revenue. But because most life science technology, and at least half of our portfolio has to go through FDA or some regulatory agency before it can get to market, we look at a variety of points along the way. So FDA clearances, clinical trial status, CMS reimbursement, patent filings, revenue, mergers, acquisitions, IPOs, and all kinds of exits of what we consider success. And in some cases, you know, to your earlier point, it's very gratifying for having first-time submitters win an award. As far as we're concerned and they're concerned, that's a great success. And you know, I'll talk a little bit later in my talk about some of those early kind of metrics. But those are the types of things we're interested in. And then we also want to downstream partner with angel, VC, and strategic partners as well.
So I was going to ask about that.
Handoffs are good successes also.
Exactly. So I was going to follow up on that and ask to what extent do you think maybe preparing or having better prepared companies for Chris, for example, to invest in is an aim of the SBIR program?
I would say that it's a very important aim, and within the past couple of years, it's a newly relevant aim. You know, for many, many years, of course, we have to make the awards. By law, we have to make all the SBIR awards, and that's what we're really required to do. And for a very long time, we know the agencies did that. And more than a decade ago, we realized, okay, so that's fine and well and good, and we're meeting our congressional mandates, but giving them the money and reading their progress reports is not enough to ensure company success, although it's the only thing we really had to do. Right. So we started developing programs more than a decade ago to provide technical and commercialization assistance to companies in a variety of different programs. And in the past definite year or two, we're going to expand those. We have some new authority I'll talk about at 11. But most recently, we are expanding. So I'm in the central office at NIH that oversees SBIR. We are adding entrepreneurs in residence to our staff. We are building up the capacity to advise companies, give them coaching in various sorts, and also make direct connections with the angel, VC, and more recently family wealth communities to be brokers between our companies and these downstream partners. Because of our, our government status, we can't get too directly involved in some of these things, but we can connect two parties and let whatever's going to happen with them happen, and that's where we're at right now.
Actually, some of it is new to me, so that's really wonderful. I was going to ask you, Chris, I mean, if you look at the NIH review process, which is different, of course, for the SBIR, but not significantly from any standard, NIH review process. It is heavily scientifically oriented compared to more business attributes. I know you are familiar, Chris, to an extent with the NIH review process and what goes on there. If you could say add criteria to the review processes, what would it be? I mean, where would you want to see SBIR supported companies? How would you want to see them come out?
So coming from the VC community, so we are the one who provide. So I was informed that Matt provides $1 billion of non-dilutive funding annually to life sciences companies, and Oxford Bioscience Partners, which was my previous firm, we had managed $1 billion of venture money. So we are the one who's providing money and really diluting the industry, and he's the one who's providing the same amount of money and keeps the industry at the same valuation. So I feel like in this room, who's being liked and who's being perhaps disliked. So that's so let that out of the way, okay? And as for what we do, as everyone here is very, very, very well aware. So we tend to look at the company in a more holistic way, meaning that so the science, obviously, technology is the foundational core of any biotech companies, especially if the companies are in early stage. And that's something that we have increasingly been doing in recent years. So we work with academic spin-offs. We work with, even before that, academic technology transfer office and PIs and all those. And we have come to appreciate the value of non-dilutive funding significantly in recent years. And that's in the context of the fact that, again, as anyone in the room would know, there has been a lot of venture money going into the industry over the last 3-4 years. And that, I think that was a good thing, obviously, because it had helped advance a lot of business to some level of fruition. However, at the same time, what you would observe is the fact that, I'm going back to the valuation perspective of what we're discussing here. Because of those money coming from VC, the valuation in biotech has doubled over the last 5-6 years. So, like Series A valuation has doubled, IPO valuation has doubled, which have benefited a lot of people, especially perhaps investors to a certain degree. But what we do is in the context of that, at the end of the day, we have our own investors to whom we have to return their money, and then hopefully a little bit more than what we have originally gotten. And in order for that to be a successful task for us, we are looking at the company as a whole. Science and technology is very important, and we also look at, cliche is management, right? Because they are ultimately the ones who build the company literally. And when we look at some of our companies doing NIH type, BARDA type grant application, and they get feedback from the grant agencies, and the depth of science and depth of the KOL, key opinion leader review is very impressive. It's very impressive, no doubt about it. And I don't think anybody in our in-house like analysts or principals, they would be able to do that level of in-depth technical and scientific due diligence compared to something that's done by KOLs in the field. So we do appreciate that very much. But at the end of the day, again, our job is to make sure that turn that into a great company and business, and hopefully exit for us at a certain point. So we do see the great value of KOL review and grant application and non-dilutive money, but at the same time, we hope to see that we would appreciate the grant application and submission and getting the grant would translate more directly into successful company building in a way that would be somewhat collaborative with investor like us.
Would there be an advantage to a company that went through the SBIR program, said one or two application or even got a good score and you have the review, compared to a company that just went straight to VCs? I mean, would you say that as an advantage?
Sure. So when there are a few reasons why companies apply for grant. I think the primary reason, and I think it's a very important reason, is that at that stage of the company when they are seeking grant, a lot of them are not quite, I would say, venture ready, meaning that there are some work that needs to be done, some key, rudimentary but still key data that needs to be produced at if you had like $200,000, for example. And some VCs do provide that money as a incubation money, and hopefully followed up with the Series A, et cetera. But yes, they're getting technology, very early proof of concept for the company through grant money. I think it will be very helpful.
Would you see that as a similar goal? I mean, Matt, to an extent, do you see a company that is solely based on grants as a success, or maybe not? Because there are those companies who go over and over and submit and win on a regular basis, really live off the grants.
There's a relatively small number of companies who are savvy grant writers and grant winners. And we're at this point now where we really want them to commercialize their technology. The goal of the program is to get tech into the marketplace. And at NIH, compared to some other contracting agencies, we're not the customer of the technology. So Department of Defense is going to buy their SBIR technology, NASA is going to buy their SBIR technology. We're not that customer. We want the technology commercialized into the open marketplace, and we want to help facilitate that in any way we can. Knowing that in many cases, SBIR funding, even if it's a couple of $1 million, with a first or second phase 2, in some cases is kind of the very beginning of the path they need to take, and they might need, obviously, for a new drug or a new biologic, hundreds of millions of dollars and partnerships down the line. So we're going to be a big part of the beginning of that. We may not see the outcome for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and it may also get buried, in an acquisition or something like that. And so it is important for us, and to which we do relay to our companies the importance of this is a product-driven program to get technology into the marketplace, and it's not just kind of a grant writing exercise.
So if you follow on that, and we remember 2018, which was an amazing IPO year for life sciences, and there are so many earlier stage companies in preclinical that would go through an M&A with a big pharma and find a strategic partner. and even there were a few IPOs for very small or very early stage companies. How does that affect your criteria then? I mean, that kind of changes the companies you look at.
It's a very, we fund 1,400 companies a year. There's a handful at best of IPOs that affect the SBIR directly. And, and frequently when a small business goes IPO, it doesn't necessarily actually take it out of contention for SBIR. Obviously, they have a lot more owners now, but there's ways in which the SBA provides guidance on how to calculate. So, I mean, frequently certain types of IPOs and certainly mergers and acquisitions usually take companies right out of the program. They become ineligible. But public companies can be eligible.
Right.
And so that's frequently a good thing because they can continue to innovate at the earliest stage. And then, obviously their shareholders want results. It's a very, the vast majority of our companies are privately held. And I've heard definitely from experience that when a company becomes, even though seemingly nothing changes overnight, everything changes overnight when you become a publicly traded company. It is actually not the same company, and it's a totally different beast to manage than when it was a privately held company. And those have, and frequently, they may be given, told, don't worry about SBR anymore by their board, or go right for VC or angel. And so those are all considerations.
You mentioned earlier that in the past couple of years that there is more communication, I guess, between yourself and the pharma or the industry at large, the VCs, the angels, etc. I mean, if you were to take your position with a company, you would probably, or some people from NIH, would take a seat on their board, and there would be direct communication per each specific company. Is that something that could be entertained, and someone is even thinking about? And maybe, Chris, after that, I mean, how would you respond to having a government, interest represented in the board?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, you can decide that is a horrendous conflict of interest and in no way, shape, or form ever allowed and will never be allowed. All of that said, there are funny things happening at the top that we all read about, but it really is a non-starter. It's just it's a huge conflict of interest, and we do have some federal staff who come from industry or want to go back to industry, and sometimes they learn a lot on this side of the microphone, and they want to spin off their own. They want to start a company. They can't do that without leaving the government, and in some cases having a 1 or 2 year cooling off period, depending on what kind of position they held in the government. So we have very strong, purposeful conflict of interest rules. While it's a good idea in theory, and obviously folks wouldn't mind, we have to play the stewardship of this taxpayer dollars role very carefully and very carefully.
No, I get it. So yeah, Chris.
So obviously there is no government conflict of interest, that comes with grant money, which is a good thing for everyone. One way that we see how grant money, as much as it is very valuable, that's the whole point of our discussion today, that can be a very slight hindrance to early stage companies, that we understand that it's a very tedious to get the grant, a very tedious, time-consuming, and laborious process. So if you are 5 people startup biotech who has raised maybe like $1 million, maybe $500,000, grant writing becomes really like a full-time job for somebody. It's like 1 FTE, right? And then it's not just a one-time deal. You apply for grant, and there's like phase 1 and 2, and you constantly communicate. So that sort of becomes a lot of work. So there are VCs who would prefer that company to not spend as much time and effort pursuing grant, which is it's relatively speaking, it's a relatively small money than large VC money. So there is some notion of grant having sort of 2 sides to that, and that is more true the earlier the company is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and we see that in some cases because for many years we've had an authority to allow majority venture-backed companies to apply for SBIR, and it's a very weirdly written law, but it has to be 2 or more VCs own a majority, no one can own more than half. And so that was authority that was hammered into us, that went away a long time ago, and it was hammered in the 2011 reauthorization, and it was a great boon, and people worried there would be a big flood of VC companies scraping out all of the little guys and girls in SBIR. And to your point, that just hasn't been the case. You know, the number of VC-backed companies we see apply for SBIR, I can count on one hand out of 6,000 or 7,000 applications. And to exactly your point, if a company is VC-backed and it's got 2 or more VCs and they own more than half, they arguably have millions of dollars, certainly low to mid to high millions. There's no incentive to apply for a $200,000 phase 1. You know, and obviously the ownership of the company has directed goals for the VC money that are not usually compatible with taking time away to apply for new grants.
Right. So when companies fairly well capitalized with the pretty sound amount of VC money pursuing non-dilutive funding, sometimes it actually becomes somewhat of like intellectual pursuit. Right.
Right.
Like there's like CSO or senior scientist who really knows his stuff, obviously, and then for him or her writing grant for additional $200,000 is not so difficult because it's something that like she or he is doing anyway.
Right. Another take on that is, of course, the infamous valley of death. The definition changes all the time, and it may even be changing between different companies, but it could be argued that it is the government's role to an extent to build that bridge over that valley of death and provide the companies, the better companies at least, a passage through, while there are others actually who claim that the early stage investors really take that role if you look at the entire development process. So both of you, what's your take on that?
So the infamous valley of death that continues to exist, and surprisingly, I'll go back to my earlier comments about there's so much venture money available, especially over the last few years, and unfortunately, a lot of that money has gone to relatively small number of companies. So funding has been polarized, like a lot of other things today. And then that leaves a lot of companies among whom obviously there are potentially very promising and interesting companies who were kind of left out from that large chunk of venture money that went into the industry. And because of that, valley of death still exists, I think it will continue to exist, and in some ways, they kind of have to exist for our own business to succeed. Right. So what some VCs do is resorting to build your own company, right? So put in a lot of money earlier on and help the company just cross the valley of death. So they don't have to worry about crossing it because you help them, you give them money. But again, I'm talking about those others who have not been fortunate enough to have raised like $30 million Series A. I think the government money, the non-dilutive money is really, really, really critical. And then perhaps I'll deviate slightly. So we are active in US and Canada, and I have some relationship in Israel, and we have a fund in South Korea. And it's interesting that in South Korea, government is the largest LP in VC fund. So through that, it's a very different mechanism relative to non-dilutive funding, but over 1/3 of the money that Korean VCs raise, it actually comes from government. Wow. So government, in effect, is helping significantly for a company to cross the value of death. But think about it, interestingly, it's the situation where government money going into the company and industry is very, very dilutive in that case. So it's something I thought was interesting.
It is an interesting program. Yeah.
So that's a very good question, interesting about the Valley of Death. We have lots of discussions about it. We've even talked about the Valley of Death before company formation. Academic was not starting strong companies, and they're kind of dead before they get started because they don't have the right tools. But to lay this part out and then go back on it, SBIR in and of itself was never designed or the intent to get a product from feasibility to the market beyond. It was never designed for that. It was designed to do some feasibility in phase 1, some R&D in phase 2, and have someone collectively else pick it up in what we call phase 3 commercialization. All of that said, we have now lots of different mechanisms to help bridge that valley, but it's definitely, we can only go maybe not even halfway, but we can go part of the way, and we have to have folks come and meet us. And so we have, parts of the flexibilities we have to help that along there is we have, I would argue, maximum budget flexibility. Folks can ask for grants in the amounts they think they need for the project. Yes, there are numbers that the SBA and we put in our solicitations, and those are just legally numbers we have to stick in there, but you can really ask for anything you need within a certain amount of reason, and then talk to us about it, and you'll be given advice on the appropriateness of your budget. But you can get a phase 1, you can get a phase 2, you can get a second phase 2 for $3 or $4 million. You can use to, and soon again we'll be able to get a commercialization readiness pilot program grant for another $3 million. So on one project, one grant, you can string together $6, $7, $8 million over 5 or 6 years just on one, plus you can go parallel with other projects. So you really can string together some really decent money to get you far enough along where you're going to be much more attractive to whatever downstream funding or partners you need.
Actually, an interesting follow-up on that would be that each of you, your take on the funding is very different. I mean, Chris and VCs in general, they invest in companies. Matt, you do not invest in companies, you invest in projects. So that actually creates a very different perspective.
It does, and that's changing a little bit. So at the fundamental level, yes, we've run project by project, but we are now, via some of those things I talked about a few minutes ago, want to now begin to help the companies think more holistically about themselves as a company. So yes, we're going to give you $1 million or $2 million phase 2 for this project, but we're going to give you business advice and pitch coaching and access to networks that we have. We have new relationships with the Angel Capital Association, and we're talking with some family offices and other types of things. And those are much more company level focused. And so we're really building, actually we have an ad out for a new Office of Innovation Director at NIH that SBR will fall under to help build this more of an ecosystem around the companies. So yes, it's the grants and the projects, but we're building all this around that.
Yeah, so we also start to see more public entities, in this case, universities, start. So we were, just last month, we were at a startup pitch at one of the premier universities in the East Coast, and there were 30 companies presenting in front of VCs and like big pharma, and the presenters were actually the PIs, the professors, and they gave like 3-minute pitch, literally, followed by 2-minute Q&A, and they were very good, and very good because
so they were trained to
exactly. So they were very good because not just speaking style and eloquence and all that, but they addressed the science, but at the same time, more importantly, they addressed the gap that exists in the clinic in healthcare system at large. So started out with this white space gap, and then they were telling exactly why their very basic science could become something that will fill this, address this problem. And we have learned that the university had put in a lot of effort to coach these the PIs, and they brought in consultants and advisors. And so I think there is more and more sort of bridge between university professors who are supported by government, obviously, doing things and thinking about their science in terms of how this actually becomes a long-term successful business that actually solves the real problem that exists today.
Yeah, we're trending to more focus on the B a lot in SBIR business. It's a larger, how many folks here are academic, have academic PhDs? And you apply for you found companies, you apply for SBIR, and you frequently make yourself the founder, CEO, everything. And it is a very large gulf to being a great academic scientist who goes to meetings and gives posters and gives talks, which I'm a card-carrying scientist, and I find all of that really boring. That's why I do this. To giving a concise 3 to 10 minute pitch with 10 slides and no more than one slide or half a slide on data. Arguably, downstream investors invest in companies and in people. The science, they will not 100%, but will likely assume it's there if you've got some good a grant or two and some good stuff going. But they're really investing in people and in the company itself.
Moving on to different perspective of it, Matt. And SBIR success rates, if I remember correctly, are about 15, 16, maybe 18% or so?
We just got the 18 numbers, which I'll show.
Okay.
They're around 18, 20% for phase 1,
20%.
35, 40 for phase 2, 20+% for direct phase 2, fast track.
Mm-hmm. So I would imagine that you wouldn't claim that 80% of the projects submitted are not good science, but you are limited by the budget that you have.
Sure.
If it would be up to you, I mean, what would you fund? I mean, how high would the pay line go if it would be just your decision, not limited by budget?
That's a very hard question because the best part about my job is I have none of that $1 billion. So I don't make the funding decisions. We do leave, this is long-term standing discussion in the SBIR community and in some quarters about the SBIR program is, while it's increased the past couple of years, is not big enough and should be double or triple or 10 times. And there just isn't the demand. While, yes, we're funding 20% of phase 1s, a good portion of the ones we're leaving on the table shouldn't be funded anyway. Mm-hmm. So certainly some of them. And it's hard to know, how far it should go. And so certainly the percentages for SBIR are going to be staying the same for a while. And we get increases in the NIH budget, which raises our overall SBIR budget. And so it's kind of hard to say. We essentially doubled the SBIR program in the past 8 years. When I came into the office 8 years ago, it was $650, $660 million at NIH. Now it's $1.1 billion. And we're seeing increased volume of applications, but there's also, it's about the quality, not the quantity.
Right.
And so we're working on in different areas to try to coach and help new, especially first-time submitters, to increase better quality. And of course, a big focus of ours is on women and minority entrepreneurs and increasing, yes, the volume, but also the quality as well.
Well, my final question, then, I'll open it up for others to ask additional questions if there are any. So I'm going to let you in on some internal data at FreeMind. We've been around for 20 years, and we've been researching our clients. We help many companies submit, and we submit many applications with them. And we had found some really interesting statistics looking at our data. So we found actually statistically significant correlation between a company's ability to be scored compared to not discussed and their future business performances, at least within our clients. I don't claim this is true for the market at large. For example, a scored company compared to not discussed will raise 4 times more money, will stay in business compared to about 30% dropping out of business with the not discussed. Will have a greater chance of an exit with a high valuation. So if we take those numbers as representative, and at least it's true for our clients, to what extent, both of you, to what extent do you feel the NIH review process could be either a predictive or at least a de-risking measure for investors looking into their future investments?
I will be the last person to claim that the NIH peer review system is good to go. It's evolving, and it evolves in real time, and it is far from perfect, and it relies on humans to do much of it. And when you rely on humans, you get things that happen. We are, to the earlier point about the focus on science, we are in the process of revamping peer review for SBIR to put us much, much stronger focus on commercialization. Not to do away with the science, but to have a much more even playing field. including, we have those 5 criteria and all those
Right.
sentences underneath. Rewriting, we can't change the 5 words, significance, approach, innovation, investigator, and environment, but we're going to rewrite all the sentences underneath to have a much stronger commercialization focus, and I think that can help. There's literature out there about peer review
Right.
and predictive value in the basic science community. Do people who just miss or just hit get more or less papers and citation impact factors? And do you just randomly give out the money, or if you pay people just below the pay line, do they do better? And there's all kinds of data out there on that, or studies on that. It's really hard to say. I think a bad project is a bad project. I tell you, I talked to, arguably hundreds of people, most of which right before the deadline, and every one of our 6,000 to 7,000 applicants think they have the absolute 100% best project on the planet and just write me the check. And at least half of them are deluding themselves because they have to kind of think about the bigger picture and where the market is and a lot of other considerations. So I would say that peer review and scores and reviewer feedback is important, but just a part of the total story of downstream predictors, and it's not that reliable in a lot of cases.
I think the very interesting correlation that you found in-house of company being scored and their long-term success seems to be some correlation. I think it probably attests to at least 2 things. Number one is the fact that something that we've been discussing, their science and technology, the core, the project, individual projects probably is pretty sound. So it's a form of validation in terms, coming as seen and assessed by key opinion leaders. And number 2, as importantly and possibly more importantly in some ways, especially in current funding environment where it seems to be there's a lot of money, but it's not going to enough number of people. I think the grant itself, and especially the timing of grant, again, we're talking about early stage companies where you need some money to get to the next stage where you're appealing to VCs. And grant money itself, I think it's a form of like opportunity, almost like a blessing that's given to you. So you have that, and now you have the capability to go on, as opposed to it's about de-risking. And a lot of people, as much as VCs are claiming that we take risk, but everyone hates risk, right? So when everyone hates risk and everyone is sort of afraid of what if I put in money at this point and what if I lose my money? But then that's when the companies tend to get grant money, and that paves the way for the company to get to the next level. So it's almost like a lifeline in some ways. So I think those 2, validation and the fact that it itself is a blessing, opportunity that is given to you, that makes the company to go on, and that possibly explains the fact that you seem to see some correlation there.
Very good. So we've got about 10 minutes, I think, to go, and my questions are up, but yeah.
I have a question for the panel. Can you talk about first-time applicants, and do you have some words of wisdom?
Sure. So, yeah, the question was, can you give some advice and what's about first-time applicants? You'll see in a little while, about a third of our applications are from first-time applicants a year, or get 2,000 or so. And about a third of our awardees are first-time applicants in phase 1. A key is it's really about communication and preparation. We really view applicants as our partners. And so when you need to engage with the government, as daunting as that may seem, as a first-time submitter where you're only experienced maybe with the IRS, your government experience, and those aren't typically favorable interactions. So you will find that the vast majority of us are happy and willing to talk to you at any and all times over email and phone. Developing a relationship with the program officer, getting advice, using your local resources, your local state small business development centers, organizations like FreeMind and other consultants. There's For Hire, there's nonprofit, there's state matching programs. There are enormous number of resources in your backyard that most first-time applicants don't realize. You are you all typically feel you're in it alone your first time, and you don't have to be. And also, it's just, especially your first time, but every time, it takes longer than you think to prepare and apply. And it takes time to get registered in all the systems. We just had a deadline on Monday. Who knew that? Yeah, so we just had a deadline on Monday, and I got emails right now coming in about people who had issues. Giving yourself, it takes a couple months to put together a good, strong application, even though in a phase one, the meat of the application is only 6 pages and 1-page specific aims. That's a very hard thing to write. And the specific aims is the most important piece of 1-pager you will write for a grant. And it's easy to screw it up, and it's harder to get it just right. And so it's really taking advantage of local resources, consultants, and relationships, and giving yourself plenty of time, more than you think you need.
Question here.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Following up on that question, a lot of early stage companies are virtual. They have offices that are at WeWork or Regis, and you can't get a DB number if you're in that kind of facility. Is there another way for early stage companies who don't have a physical place to get grants?
Virtual companies are an interesting proposition, and we're thinking about that real hard. You need a DUNS, you need a DUNS number. Yeah, DUNS number. You need the EIN to get a DUNS number. And ultimately, when you do the work, SBR is designed in another age, in the 80s, that the company has to do a good percentage of the work in their company facilities with their employees, which means wholly virtual. You can't subcontract out the grant and be a pass-through. And so there does need to be some demonstration that you will get some facilities to rent or lease at the time of award. But we haven't heard too much about that particular issue about not getting a DUNS number due to virtual companies.
It's an issue.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So has NIH thought about doing something similar to what NSF does with the I-Corps?
We have an I-Corps program I've had for many years. Absolutely. But it's for our phase one awardees. It's not pre-company for academic. It's we have an I-Corps program for phase one SBR and STTR awardees you can apply to get into with a supplement, which we give you the money to participate in I-Corps. Parts of NIH also interact. We leverage and interact with our colleagues at NSF using their I-Corps nodes and networks and everything like that, and collaborate with them still to this day. So we do have an I-Corps program.
Similarly focused on commercialization?
Yes, it's focused on customer discovery. Send me a note or contact. Do you have a program officer you work with at NIH?
We did the NSF I-Corps.
Okay. So when you come in, once you're an awardee, a phase one awardee, you can do I-Corps. We have other programs as well. We do something called C3I, which is a related program as well.
There's one more. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We just submitted an SBIR grant, and we found in the review generally came back positive that there were a bunch of things that they sort of misunderstood about our technology. Obviously, that's on the writer. I think we probably didn't make ourselves as clear as we could have. However, is there any kind of appellate process? We haven't had a final decision yet. This is just
right.
reviews from the outside reviewer, not from NIH.
Right.
What are the steps that a company can go through to see it through?
So, the typical process is you have your peer review session, which is available to you. You can look at the reviewers. You get your summary statement within a couple weeks of the meeting. You get your score pretty quickly within a few days. Once you have that score and the summary statement, then you set up a call with your program officer who's listed on the summary statement to discuss possibilities of funding. They'll either tell you yes, no, or maybe. There's a lot of maybes. We do have NIH. Here's another. How many folks think that the NIH is shut down? You know how many people I talked to yesterday that were surprised to see me here? The NIH is not shut down. 75% of the federal government is operating with a full year budget. So we hit the ground running this year for the first time in 20 years with a full federal budget. So all the institutes know exactly how much money they have. They know what their funding lines can be. And so they can give better advice earlier in the fiscal year about your likelihood of funding based on that. And then they can give you advice to revise and resubmit depending on your score or the likelihood of funding. If after peer review, a month later, it goes to advisory council, which does not make funding decisions, nor do they peer review your application. Advisory council at all institutes is just a over high-level administrative review. Frequently, it's an en bloc. You know, we really only bring applications to council that have issues. And then it goes to funding meetings internal to the agency, and then the institute director signs off on funding lists, and then you get a phone call that you're funded. Or you don't get a phone call. And then, but the key to my earlier point is just keep in pretty regular contact. Write your program officer and say, here's my summary statement, let's have a discussion. What's your timeline for making funding decisions? When will I know, one way or the other? And if I get it, fine, and if I not, what are my options? When's the next deadline? So now, you know, you can obviously be targeting the April deadline one way or the other if you think you have a borderline score, and they can give you a sense of that.
So the program officer is the first resort, and are there any other external processes? Because again, the NIH reviewers were all external to the NIH.
Correct.
Yeah.
The advisory council is external, but you know, after peer review, it's all an agency process. We have NIH law and regulation provides that we do a two-tiered peer review process. First of which is technical peer review, which you did. Second is advisory council. That's a bit more cursory, not less important. Just it's a different aspect of it. Then they make funding decisions. And now that we have a budget this whole year, so there's no real delays per se. If you applied in September and you got reviewed in the fall, the councils meet in January, early February, and usually within a few weeks of then, you know. But you can, all this is publicly available. You can go online at your institute and find out when their advisory council meets, contact your PO, ask about what next steps are and when you can expect to find out. Mm-hmm.
So we'll take one last question here. And
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a question for Christopher maybe. Could you elaborate a little bit about what your portfolio companies, how many of them are directly engaged with NIH, and overall in the industry, or what you see, what the trends are?
So among our portfolio companies, we have companies who have become our portfolio, meaning they got funded by us, and then now in the process of applying for government grants. And there are other companies who, so how we work is we do a lot of academic spin-off type investments. So prior to making our investment decision, we start actually working with EIRs and entrepreneurs who are out there, and they sometimes already have put together a company and they are applying for grants and they have gotten grants, and we follow the process, but we are not obviously intimately involved in any way because those are not the companies that we have invested yet. So it really there's a diverse range of companies or pre-investment for us who are involved in some way with grants. And again, as I said earlier, as much as there's great value in non-dilutive funding, but sometimes what we see is it's very time-consuming, and that sometimes almost becomes a concern for us as to when the company has to be more holistically being put together as early as possible. People are just so consumed by grant application. They spend like hours and hours for a long time, and then they finally get it, and sometimes they don't even get scored. So, we have some mixed view of how grant is playing out on our portfolio company and prospective portfolio companies.
well, thank Matt and Chris. Really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Following the rest of the agenda. Enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.